consensus actually, out of the context of the background of mainstream society, is a pretty radical act and is a pretty different, it requires a different kind of mindset and orientation to get good results. 98% or more of the people in the United States, at least, were raised in a competitive culture, adversarial, hierarchic, capitalistic culture, and where you learn to, how do I fight to win? For consensus to thrive and to get its potential, you need to understand that you need a different mindset. You need to not bring your competitive self to that engagement. You're trying to build cooperative culture in contrast to competitive culture, which means, how do I figure it out with other people rather than how do I prevail over other people?
Okay, here we are. Welcome everyone to the Understanding How Consensus Works in Communities webinar with Laird Schaub. My name is Lauren. I'm your host for this session. So if you encounter any tech issues or otherwise need some assistance, please don't hesitate to send me a private message in the chat and I will be more than happy to help you out. All right, and now to introduce our very special guest today, Laird Schaub. Laird's specialty is up-tempo inclusive meetings that engage the full range of human input, teaching groups to work creatively with conflict and diversity, all the while being ruthless about capturing as much product as possible. He lived for 4 decades at Sandhill Farm, an income-sharing rural community that he helped found. Laird also helped found the Foundation for Intentional Community, where he served as the main administrator for 28 years. In 1987, he created a self-insurance fund for healthcare among income-sharing communities called PEACH, and that stands for Preservation of Equity Accessible for Common Health, and he ran PEACH for 22 years. All right, and with that, I'm going to officially hand the talking stick over to you, Laird. Thank you so much for joining us today and imparting your wisdom on us, so over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. So today's a 1-hour chunk is, all right, what is, you did taste whether or not you think I know what I'm talking about, or you think you might enjoy learning from me about the general topic of consensus, which will be started in 2 weeks from now as a 10-hour course divided up into 5 successive weeks of 2 hours each. So this is just 1 hour, and just to give you a taste of it. So Lauren, let's go ahead and start with some of the slides that we got. We got time. This is going to be basically me giving you some things and pausing and seeing if there's responses. Ordinarily in the webinars that we'll do with the 10-hour thing, there'll be some interactive stuff, there'll be breakout groups and stuff, but we don't have time to really do much with that today. So this is more like, who is this guy? Let's have a taste of him. So I'm trying to set a context. Consensus is a fairly common term in community. It is the most common form. It exists in a number of varieties, but in some sense or another, it is the most common form of decision-making used in intentional community. However, having said that, it doesn't mean people know what they're doing. Consensus actually, out of the context of the background of mainstream society, is a pretty radical act and is a pretty different. It requires a different kind of mindset and orientation to get good results. So a lot of groups naively adopt it because it's common or they're advised that it's a good direction to go. They read maybe a little bit about it and think they understand it, and often get in over their heads because they haven't stopped to really digest the depth of what it will take for consensus to work. And so I want to alert you to that right at the outset before we get into the ins and outs or mechanics of some things. Consensus requires an adjustment from an upbringing. I mean, there's exceptions. I'll allow that. It depends on how you were raised. But I was, and most people, I mean, 98% or more of the people in the United States, at least, were raised in a competitive culture, adversarial, hierarchic, capitalistic culture, and where you learn to, how do I fight to win? I don't mean that in a manipulative or mean-spirited way, although those things exist. I just mean it's a combative thing, and a struggle will produce the best outcome kind of thing. And in consent, for consensus to thrive and to get its potential, you need to understand that you need a different mindset. You need to not bring your competitive self to that engagement. That you're trying to build cooperative culture in contrast to competitive culture, which means, how do I figure it out with other people rather than how do I prevail over other people? And so this is a different way of it requires unlearning competitive conditioning. And that's not a simple thing. It's because we've been swimming in that water most of our lives, or maybe all of our lives in some cases. And so to actually make this shift requires making visible those things which you do kind of automatically now, because it's the way we've been raised. And it's been reinforced in all the major, institutions in the mainstream culture, whether that's family or church or school or work. All those things tend to have a hierarchic and competitive or adversarial milieu in which you operate. You have to learn how to function in that world. And so whatever you learn there often becomes, even though that maybe allows you success in the mainstream context, when you're trying to do cooperative culture in an intentional community, you're doing a different animal. You're doing a different thing. And those behaviors that were rewarding are now going to get you into trouble. And so you need to understand that, how we can be graceful about people where they are in their journey to becoming more aware and more cooperative, but also sending a clear note of what are we trying to encourage, what behaviors do we want with each other, and being aware of that and how to move toward that is going to be enormously beneficial in terms of whether or not you have success in using consensus. Okay, so I've seen if I've covered everything on this slide. All right, I think I have. Let's go to the next one. So let's think about one of the key moments with consensus, or an aspect of community living, is a group meeting. You're not in meetings all the time, thank God, but it is a portion of the time, and important things happen in meetings. And that's where consensus comes into play, not just as a mindset, but a way in which we engage with each other. And the model that most of us have been raised in out of the mainstream is let's say you know what the topics are ahead of time. That means it's not always the case, but suppose you do, which is a good idea. This is the agenda, what we're going to be discussing. And so you do your homework. There may be some material in the way of background. You read it, you think about it. You may have some conversations with friends. All that's fine. However, in the mainstream model is you do your thinking about it and then decide, okay, what do I think is the best way forward? And I don't mean this in a selfish way. You may be thinking about, this is what I think is best for the group. All right. However, out of the mainstream model, the idea is you are encouraged generally throughout your life to then come into the meeting prepared to speak cogently, confidently, and concisely about, this is what my response, this is my thinking, my best thinking about this. This is what I think we ought to do. And then to support and defend what you say if somebody doesn't like it. The idea being that a healthy struggle will produce the best outcome. And so sometimes you have to expect everybody isn't going to like it. There could be some back and forth, and you need to fight for your ideas, and then they will survive or prevail if other people are persuaded. And that's sort of the model. Now, and I'm leaving aside backroom politics and manipulation and all of that stuff. Those things happen, but I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about even a really clean, well-intended approach. And I want to suggest that for consensus to actually do well and bloom, you don't want people coming into the meeting with their minds already invested in a solution. You want, in the sense of like, I need to defend my idea. You want people coming in with an open mind. Now, I didn't say empty mind. I said open mind. So you still you do all that prep work. You read the material, you think about it. You think, what are my responses? What do I think is best for the group? All that's good. All that's still fine. However, you want to come in really with an attitude of open to surprise. that it's like, it isn't about how good your thinking is, it's about how good the group's collective wisdom is. And so maybe somebody will change your mind. Somebody will have thought of something perhaps that you did not and can enhance upon your thinking. And that can be good for the group. Is because it's not about, oh, how good can I look? It's about how good can the group make a decision. And the mainstream model is, if people argue for their personal views, the strongest idea will survive the struggle. In a cooperative group, you want the least possible barrier to people putting forward the ideas that are cogent to the topic, so that we have the widest range of material to work with. There's always discernment about whether or not what somebody says is brilliant or not, or really helps us forward. However, you don't want any inhibitions to it coming out, as long as it's well intended and it's on topic. And so that it's a perfectly fine outcome, that your idea doesn't really prevail or even relate necessarily to what the final outcome is. You contributed and did your work and you paid attention, and you weren't resistant to some other idea coming forward if that seemed better. I mean, if there was a surge of interest in that, the group decided it. That's not your failure, it's a success of the group. And it's your resistance to hearing different ideas than yours that gets in the way. That's a common element in mainstream culture, and it needs to be as extinguished as possible in community for consensus to thrive. And that's not a simple bar, because unfortunately, most people join community without understanding that for this to work well, we need a commitment to unlearn competitive conditioning. And so a lot of times that's not revealed until you've already bought the house. And it's like you're already there now, and you often have people who bring those same strategies and behaviors that they've learned to be successful with in the mainstream into the community. And now you just have more occasions to fight. And it's like it's a slog instead of light and creative. So understanding that mindset and the need for that kind of shift is foundational, both for the community to do well and for consensus to be a good choice in how you make decisions. So a key test for this, and this is the last sentence on this slide, is that you can just test for, the interesting case is when there's non-trivial disagreement about what to do. You know, those are the interesting problems, the ones where it's not obvious what to do. And so there's competing ideas, there's different ideas. That in and of itself is okay. The question is the examination or the promotion or explanation of those different ideas represent a tug of war energy, like trying to pull people toward you and away from those ideas that are different than yours? Or is it like, oh, that's interesting, now we have a different idea, let's stop and think what that means? I mean, is there an openness to actually embracing and looking at the contrast, even the contradiction of different ideas, to say, now what? This is more complex than I thought. What's our balanced response here, rather than which idea should win over another? So that's the difference. You're looking for that. You don't want tug of war. You want balance it. You want openness, as long as it's on topic, you know, and if it's relevant, you want the least barrier to that coming forward. All right, let me pause there and see if there's any questions about that. I mean, I don't know. I don't see your faces, so I don't know if you're like, woo, or whether it's like, oh no, I knew all that. Any comments about that? A lot of groups struggle over this. I mean, I've been a consultant now for cooperative groups for 35 years, and I run into groups who still don't get this. I mean, just constantly, or some segment of the group doesn't get it.
I'm not seeing anything at the moment, so it all must be crystal clear.
All right. Is there, okay, great. Let's go back to slides.
You got it. Oh, actually, I see a hand raised from Greg.
All right.
Greg, what you got?
Beyond forcefully, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Beyond doing what we can to try to compel people to come to your workshop in a couple of weeks, how do you suggest approaching folks who feel convinced that they are embracing consensus, but are basically embodying all of the competitive culture elements that you are describing there?
Well, rather than judging them, which, you know, I encourage you to look at what are the results of that behavior. You would look at, in other words, do people feel intimidated to say what they've got? That can't be a good result, you know, if that's what's happening. Or if people feel exhausted or afraid to speak up because they might be the target of an attack while somebody's defending their ideas. I mean, I'm trying to talk about the behaviors that are competitive, that get in the way. It quashes openness. It tends to suppress comment, that kind of thing, and it creates a higher bar for some people. Enjoy the fight, and so it's like that. It's like, fine, good. I enjoy this. I feel alive. So let's go at it. And other people feel appalled by it, and then they often like stop coming to the meetings because they don't either like the energy and they don't like occasionally being the target of somebody's displeasure if they say something they don't like. So you can look at attendance. You can look at the energy around. Do people enjoy meetings? You can look at the implementation. In other words, sometimes ideas in a competitive environment prevail because of the force of the people willing to promote them, not because the idea is better, but because it's too much, it costs too much to push against it. And so they give up. And so they get dispirited and they allow that other thing to prevail. But the energy behind its implementation doesn't really solve the problem, and people don't feel closer as a result of it. So, I mean, you can talk about satisfaction level, which is not about undercutting the person's ideas. You want that to come forward. So if you could say something like, wow, I'm really excited that you brought in this other way of looking at it. I think it's important we sit at it. And I want to do it in a way that doesn't get in the way of listening to other people who may not agree with you. That kind of comment may reinforce, good that you spoke, but try to tone down the energy kind of thing and see whether or not you get any movement or awareness from it. Now, one of the things that might come up here, and I don't know if I'm taking this farther than you want, Greg, but is sometimes the arguments advance that, oh, consensus takes too long. We just really need to get right in there and get right at it and move through it quickly so that we can get the meeting over with. And you know, I'm not talking about dawdling or wandering around. You want to be on topic and you want to be focused. However, if you've got this moment I said where you've got honest disagreement of a non-trivial nature in the conversation, you don't want to race through that where, you know, thumbs up, thumbs down, one win, one loses. You want to say, all right, we got different angles on it. What's the most sensitive way for us to balance these things given this disagreement? You know, it's like, what's the way forward that holds the whole best? That's the question that should be foremost in the group rather than which idea prevails over another. And so that takes longer to do, but in the end, nobody feels run over or thrown off the bus or whatever metaphor you want. Nobody feels embarrassed or wiped out by it or hesitant to speak because they might be associated with a losing idea. All those things get in the way. And so it's all about the energy, not all about your work. You want the ideas to come forward and you want the energy around it to be soft and open. And so when you've got people who are not reinforcing that, keep inviting them into, let's pay attention to how it feels, not just what gets decided. Because we're losing people when we go with this harsh and pushy energy. Long answer. Does that help, Greg?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Great. Thanks for that question, Greg, and that thorough answer, Laird. We do have a few more coming in here. I'll try to ask these in order that they were received. This one's from Sache. My apologies if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. How do you suggest unlearning competitive culture?
Well, good question. I think it's hopefully you either already have or can create in the context of the community. It's good to have conversation of like, we're trying to be cooperative or at least less competitive than what we left behind. This is one of the main reasons we say it's an intentional community. That's one of the things we're intending, a different way of being together than what mainstream offerings are, or just some kind of random HOA. You're trying to collectively decide, and you want that to be an enjoyable experience. The lifeblood of community is relationships. So you want connection, you want flow. And so if we can talk about that, you can help people identify what are moments that you've already had in the group or otherwise in your life where this was present and what was characteristic of it. Get people talking about, in other words, I think everybody's got some taste of this, some more than others, or you can create moments where that's paramount or at least manifest so people can touch it and hold it and speak to whether or not they're fed by it. Is this what you want to, let's contrast an experience that was very tug of war like with one that was very collaborative and creative, and then have people discuss which did you like better and why, what was the elements. And so you give them motivation of like, wow, I know I want this. This is really what I was looking for. And then you can talk about, well, what behaviors promote that? And how can we all do our own work to be part of that, or even be open to be reminded of, let's try to remember to be collaborative, even though in the heat of the moment, we slip back into this old conditioning. So I'm not talking about the behavior police here. I'm talking about being kind, and yet it's a journey, and we need to reinforce each other in moving toward it. And the easiest way is by recognizing the successes. It's easier to have success with a carrot than the stick kind of thing, rather than punishing people or calling them out when they're competitive. Try to remind people of the times when they've been collaborative, and that's the side that works better for everybody. Okay.
Wonderful. Thanks, Laird.
Yeah.
We got another one from Helen. How do you get people who are combative to change their ways? I'd like to know the answer to this too.
Yeah, well, it's the same way. You have to think about, you can ask them, what is your experience of those? Ask the person whose behavior is combative, what they're getting out of, the experiences, and then reflect back to them, probably things like, some people don't come to the meetings because it's hard for them to be in the room with you. Because it feels like you come on too strong. It doesn't feel like you're open to other ideas. It feels like when somebody suggests something different than you're thinking, you attack them. I'm not sure I'm getting the, don't make up answers. I'm just sort of imagining what a competitive or combative energy might be. It's often perceived as bullying, and they think, no, this is just the way I was taught, and that may be true. They don't think they're bullying. They just think they're showing up in the way that they learn to do, and they haven't gotten it yet that they need to make a behavior switch. But you can ask them to reflect on, this is actually, people are not enjoying being around you when you're this way. And I'm going back to my response to Greg, you can honor that you want to hear from them. You're not asking them to shut up. You're asking them to deliver their information in a way that allows for other people also to deliver theirs. And it's like, if that's getting in the way, that's not a good result for the group. Even though that's not your intention, that's the result. That's the impact of it. And so I'm asking you to either soften your voice, your energy, your pace, how loudly you speak, how quickly you speak. Maybe start with, what can you honor in what somebody said, even though you have problems. You'll get to the problems. I'm not asking you to sell out or make nice, but start with something they said that you can join with before going to the but part. That's what you often see in somebody who's responding from the combative place. If they like half of what somebody says and not the other half, almost 98% of the time, first thing out of their mouth is but. They want to talk about the differences, which are real and need discussion, but the energy in the conversation is completely different when you start with but, or you start with, I like this part of what you said, and I'm still confused or uncertain or have problems with this other part. That lands completely differently, where there's kind of an openness, like, all right, we're not there yet. We're still sorting it out. Let's hear more about what your thinking was. Maybe I missed something, that kind of thing. So hopefully those are helpful ideas.
Yeah, thank you. We have another question. You have time for that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. This one's from Suman. Sometimes those tug of war situations happen between individuals without the whole circle present or involved. We can't get the circle involved in everything. That would be not trusting the individuals and hurting their morale and unrealistic. So what do we do when mediation is not fruitful?
So I guess this can play out different ways. One of them would be two people that go at it frequently on the side, and if they're doing it privately, you're only hearing the aftermath and you're not witnessing it. If it happens in the context of a meeting, it could be a committee meeting. It wouldn't necessarily have to be everybody, but where there's other witnesses, if you collectively agree you're trying to create a cooperative culture, then hopefully you can get permission to remind one another when it doesn't appear your behavior's aligned with the commitment. Not to trash them, but to help bring them back into alignment. And maybe you can even suggest or even model the behavior you're looking for and have a conversation. Now, some people are more prone to this combative energy, are more wedded to it than others. I get it. In fact, for some people, they don't even have an identity outside of that. And so you're asking them to kind of like give up on their identity altogether when you're making this request, and that's very scary. So they may need help, like and you can do this. I've done it sometimes with people who tend to be very combative. Take some time ahead of time and say, I think there's a topic you care about. Let's sit down and talk about how you can get your ideas out in a way that I think will be easier for the group to hear. Because I want your ideas out there. And I know that what you generally fall into in the way of the way you bring it about is off-putting to a lot of people, and it's getting in the way of them hearing you and your ideas being considered well. So in your own interest and for the group's interest, let's help think about how to set this up so you can say it a different way. In other words, give them training wheels, so that rather it's not just all on them to get it done. But where you've got two people who are like constantly triggering each other, there's lots of different potentials as to what's going on. I would, though, take time with each one once, straightforward attempts to try to reconfigure or to recast what's going on in a more gentle or cooperative way. And that doesn't work. They just fall back into this same rut. Is you might ask them, so what, in theory, we want to be open to everybody's input, and you two trigger each other regularly. I mean, that's just what's normal. And it's exhausting. It can't be fun for you, and it's not fun for the rest of the group. So what can we do? The question, your homework for each person privately would be, what avenue do you want to allow for this person's input to come out that you're not going to be triggered by? It's like, what's going to help you hear their different ideas without going ballistic or whatever it is they do that's combative, and then see what they give you. And it's like, I don't really care about one rule that works for everybody. I care about what works for that person. So you're trying to see them as an individual, not label them as bad, but also hold their feet to the fire of like, we can't have you just going off when people disagree with you. That's not going to work. We need people to be able to disagree so that we can consider the whole. And you have a part of that too, just like everybody else. And so I need to know what's going to work for you where you're not to be so triggered, and see what they give you. All right.
Wonderful. Thank you, Laird. There's another question here from Diana, and I think this links back to the question from Helen about combativeness. But the question is nurturing and limit setting balance.
Well, it depends on context. So for instance, if I'm facilitating a meeting of the whole, this is a very expensive thing. All group, everybody's time is involved in stuff. And so I'm constantly watching. If somebody's going into a combative, distressful, difficult kind of energy, I'm going to want to try to redirect that if I can in a way as gently, but as firmly as possible. But there's a limit to how much time I'm willing to give that if I'm unsuccessful, because the clock's ticking on everybody's time. And so if I'm in a conversation with 2 or 3 people, like a small committee, and that shows up, I'm gonna have a little more time. I'm gonna have more flexibility because there's more latitude, and not only that, but it's more key for these people to get along. And if I feel this is frustrating, so I might work it longer in that moment, even though that wasn't what we thought we were going to be doing. I feel like this is going to pay dividends down the road, and so on. So I would adjust the amount of time I would give something to the context, and then follow up if I feel like I didn't complete it or get far enough with it in the immediate setting. I would follow it up privately and see whether or not that could be continued in a gentle but constructive way at the pace that will work for that person. And that's so individualistic about when somebody's, how much they're open to it and when they get it. It's all over the map, so it's hard to predict. But you do have to be mindful of, you don't want to just turn over, all of a sudden we have a 2-hour meeting in 45 minutes is dealing with Dale, who has a constant problem with getting triggered. That's unlikely to be a good use of that time for 45 minutes. So you have to be more. Sometimes it means let's take a break. I'll spend 5 minutes with Dale, talk about trying to bring he or she back into the room, kind of thing. There's different choices I can make, but I have to respect the time. Okay. All right.
Thanks, Laird. Diana says thank you.
All right, good. Okay, so let's go back to slides. I got a few more things. This is good though. I'm happy to talk about these things. All right, so I think, yeah, I've covered this. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so I think I've covered this one too. Let's go to the next one. And you'll be able to get, I mean, it's true, Lauren, isn't it, that they can see these slides or in the learning area or something later. You can tell them about that. But so
yeah, everybody will get a copy of the slides and the recording.
So here's a question, and let's see if I'm going to make this is an interesting. I'm going to give you my answer, but rather than just download it, let's start with the question: what qualities do you want in people trying to make decisions by consensus? Or what qualities will help develop and sustain cooperative culture and enhance relationships among members? So let me pose those questions. You can leave this up and then see if there's responses from people. I'll give you mine in a minute, but I want to stir the pot here. Who's got something to offer?
Got Chantal in the chat says curiosity.
That's good. Keep going.
Danny has empathy. Cynthia says openness to new ideas. Zan says open-mindedness.
Okay, those are similar.
Yeah,
I mean,
ability to compromise from Terry. Harmony says calmness.
Let me just a minute. Let me stay with that one. I understand the impetus behind compromise means don't being stuck, being open to moving toward other ideas. In that spirit, I like that answer. What I have a hesitation about the word compromise. I don't like to use it because it has a sense of watered down, weak, lowest common denominator. And a lot of people have that criticism of consensus is it's hard to actually be dynamic because in order to get everybody to say yes, you have to get it down to like there's nothing really progressive or really exciting about it. Otherwise, it'd be pushback. And so I don't like the concept of compromise with that flavor. I do like the sense in which you need to be creative and balancing kind of thing. If those words have a slightly different meaning for me or a different connotation than compromise. Okay, keep going. You have some other ones to read, Lauren?
I do, yeah. Sorry, I was muted. Carrie Beth says willingness to understand one another.
Yeah.
Sue says listening to others. Greg, interest, capacity to genuinely listen, again. Lizanne, being able to take criticism, self-awareness.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, and Harmony says slow steps and continuously caring. Chantal says presence.
Okay, those are all good.
Courage.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let me give you a list I've created. Thank you for that little quick brainstorm. Let's go, and you'll see there's a lot of overlap in what was suggested and what I'm going to post. So let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to give you a list of about a dozen things. There's 2 pages, and this is the first one. So I'm just going to walk you through them. The first one is you want people who are able to articulate clearly what they think. I mean, you may think this is actually not everybody's good at this. Can actually say it in a way that makes it pretty clear what they think. And then the second one is similar, however, importantly different, clearly how you feel. In my mind, you don't really get great results with consensus, and for that matter, with intentional community, unless you go beyond the realm of just the rational. You'll need to work at an energetic or an emotional level as well. And that's can be fairly radical. I believe, though, it's at the heart of consensus, even though you'll read books and talk to other teachers who may not even go down this road. I think it's a mistake. I think as human beings, we are multifaceted and too important. There's many facets. 2 of them are the rational and the emotional. There's also the intuitive, the spiritual, kinesthetic, sexual, all those can be brought into play, but I'm just focusing on emotional and rational here. And the mainstream model, for the most part, is reduce everything to the rational and operate at that level when it comes to decision making. And I think that's really stupid, because we are much more than that, and everybody's not equally skilled in that. Some people know things more sensitively or accurately in another realm than the rational. Why insist that they translate it into the rational, into a language that they're not as adept in order for it to count? So that the group will do much better work if it learns to work both rationally and emotionally. Now, that's a fair, that, there may be some pushback on that, but that's the way I teach. And so it's important then in that context that you're not just articulate about your thinking, you need to be articulate around your feeling. And you could be good with one and not the other, or both, or neither. So I think both matter. All right. Now, this is something that was mentioned in the brainstorm by some of you, hearing accurately what others say. So this is not quite the same as a good listener. This is more specific. It's not just did you allow them to speak or can parrot back their words, but you actually get it in a way that they recognize as having been heard. That's a little higher bar and very important. A lot of times repetition that bogs down meetings is about, I'm not sure people heard what I said because I didn't get the signs that indicate that to me, so I'm going to say it again. And so being able to show somebody that you got what they said in a way that they feel heard really helps things move along. And you're not having to make multiple trips around the mulberry bush. All right, the next piece, and I don't think this was mentioned, but maybe it's something, is function reasonably well in the presence of non-trivial distress in others. My point being that if you're, whether you allow feelings in the room or not, they're going to be in the room. The question is, how do you function when they're there? Now, it's going to be better if you don't try to quash it or disallow it or condescend to it. However, in other words, so that it's allowed to be more openly present. And the question is, though, a lot of us haven't been raised to actually handle that well. And it's going to make a big difference if you are not overwhelmed by another person's tears or by their anger. Now, and I'm distinguishing that from an attack. I mean, you can honor somebody's feelings without supporting them or claiming they have a right to attack other people or be aggressive with their feelings. So, I mean, I think you can allow the one and put a boundary around the other. However, some people simply find it hard to have their ears open when somebody raises their voice. And I'm not saying that with judgment. I'm just saying it depends on how you were raised. It depends on family of origin issues, lots of different things. And so the more you can function well, meaning you can hear well, you're fluid, you're not stuck, you're not afraid. When somebody else is in distress, that's an advantage for the group. Next one, and this was mentioned, how can I see what somebody's saying through their eyes? I may not agree with them, but I get their point. I can see this same problem through what they're giving me. That's very relaxing and bridging. It doesn't mean you've agreed with them. It just means I can show that I can see it. I can walk in your shoes. And the last one on this page is then able to see when you hear differences, non-trivial differences between things, that you can see bridges between people. Even if they can't, you can. That is oil on troubled waters. That helps calm things down. It isn't about one person prevailing. It's about we can build a whole that includes parts from multiple people, rather than we have to just pick one answer that one person proposes. So bridges are very powerful. Let's go to the next page. This is the rest of my list here. To be able to see the good intent underneath strident statements. It's often, I mean, the challenging part is when somebody comes on with a lot of heat or a lot of energy or a lot of reactivity, it often looks like, okay, this is aggression, or maybe it is, or it's on the edge of it, and it feels like it's exclusionary. In other words, I'm arguing from my point of view, and I want to quash others by raising my voice and turning red in the face. And so however, if you start with, oh, this person is a troublemaker, if you can say, that's not what they think they're doing, probably. It's more like, this is what they know to get their idea out there. This is what they've learned. It's not a very functional behavior in cooperative culture. They're doing the best they can. So try to imagine, what is the good intent? They care a lot about the topic. They think there's a lot of value in their idea. They want to make sure it's seriously considered. You can validate that without commenting on their overselling it. I mean, you don't have to react to the fact that they're in reaction, is the point of view I'm trying to make. And one of the ways to de-escalate is by honoring what you imagine to be their good intent without necessarily agreeing with it. This is a skill. Next piece is distinguishing, but if somebody gets aggressive, let's say, I just use that as an example, and you don't want to support that because you have an agreement to not be aggressive with each other, you can point out the thing that the person did that was aggressive and say, I really want to recast this and not let that stand on alone, because we don't really want to support aggression, which is not about you or bad. It's the thing you did here is something we want to discourage. And so we want you to be in the group. We want you to be part of it, but we don't like that delivery. And so rather than label them bad, we're saying this particular delivery didn't work, and here's why, and here's what would work better, kind of thing. So making sure that you're honoring the person even while you object to behavior, and making that clear. Some people have a lot of trouble conflating these two things, and then you're off to the races. It looks like you've rejected them, and then they're outraged, and where's the room for my opinion when it looks like you're just judging me, and they're missing the point that it was the delivery was the problem, not the idea. I mean, which may or may not have value depending on its merit. The third one here is pretty important, and this is problematic in some groups. When you make a mistake, can you own it? You know, like not that you intended harm, but you realize something you did caused harm, or somebody had a trouble with it. Can you say, okay, I get that it landed this way. I made that choice. It's my responsibility. I'm sorry. You know, that, can you apologize? Can you own when you did something unwisely or wish you'd done it differently? That can help a lot if you can own your stuff. Fourth one, you can imagine a situation when multiple people are triggered. This is going to happen some of the time. Not just one person by themselves are triggered. And then you have a dilemma of I'm going to teach, not today, but reaching out and supporting somebody when they're in a triggered state. The question is, where do you start? Who gets attention first? Even if you're aware of it, it's like both need attention. You can't give it equally to both people at the same time. It has to be done sequentially. And if you have the grace to be willing to wait while the other person gets supported first, it makes it a lot easier to have you in the group, rather than you got to attend to me first and I will make you pay until I get my attention, rather than I will wait my turn because I trust that it'll be there and I'll get it. And at the end of the day, it won't matter whether I went first or second. That kind of thing is what I'm talking about. The last one is very topical now. It's especially in the last couple of years with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and multiple now stuff. I mean, just we have constant reminders of inequity around multiple things, but certainly around race and in this country. And the question is, are we actually willing to look at the ways in which we're privileged, that the deck in some context has been slanted toward us? Are we willing to unpack that and become conscious of what we may not have been as conscious for, and understand the impact of that and how to move forward in a way that can rectify it? And this is work for the group, but it worked for the individuals. If a person is unaware and unwilling to look at that, this gets in the way and limits how far you can go in terms of relationship building and healing and creating a functioning alternative culture. Okay, let's back off this list and see. Let me check. How are we doing for time? We still got 13 minutes. Any comments? I gave you a big list there. Comments on that list?
I really admire your ability to squeeze so much information into such a small amount of time. Thank you, Laird.
I've done this before. Okay.
You know what you're talking about.
Right.
I don't see any hands or any questions.
Okay. All right, we still got 13 minutes. Let's go back to slides. I can't remember what's next. We've done that. Let's go on. Okay, so I've already touched on this earlier in this hour. However, it's important enough to underline. I'm not asking you to create an orthodoxy. I am suggesting it would be good to have a conversation in your group about what qualities are we trying to promote in each other. You're not going to find anybody probably who's excellent on everything, even if you like the list I gave you. You know, we're in different degrees or on a journey toward moving in that direction. Everybody has bad days or bad moments or are not as good in some areas than others. And I'm not asking you to start like picking on each other in the way we fall short. I want you to use it as like, this is a direction we're headed. Try, and you know, I'm reminding you, try to reinforce it when somebody does well, remind them of how, you know what, today it didn't work as well for me, whereas I'm remembering last week, you were this other way that I liked really well. I mean, that kind of thing. So you're giving them examples of you're not bad. It's just today was harder for me to work with your energy. And last week went pretty well. If we can do anything to encourage more of what we got last week, that'd be great. That'll land a lot better than, you're bad. You know, you get a demerit. And if we pick on each other, if you use this list as sort of a report card thing, it can just become another excuse for nitpicking and unpleasantness. And that's not why I do this. You want what you do in the community and in consensus to be relationship building so that you've got an easier and more defined and richer, deeper sense of together. That's where the money is here. So you want to be relational in how you speak and how you function with each other, which is not about ducking hard questions. It's getting them out in a way that is not judging and yet is promoting the culture. So it's not just what ideas or decisions you make in the moment, it's how you do the work of considering them and getting to conclusions so that you're building the road as you travel, not just an end result. So one of the things that's very distinctive about community that's important to aware of, in the mainstream, the emphasis overwhelmingly is on the bottom line. You know, it's, you know, what gets done or accomplished or agreed to is the predominant product. And so long as you either don't do anything illegal or don't get caught, it's okay, kind of thing. And there's, in the community though, the how you do things is going to matter as much as the what. So that's a different balancing act than what you've come out of. People who are highly successful in the mainstream may not be so good at the how, but they get things done. And so that gets rewarded enough in terms of salaries and promotions and so on, that they can sustain a life that looks rewarding, you know, in the way we keep score in the mainstream. Whereas you try that, you bring that same behavior in a community, you're not going to be popular. People aren't going to want to be on committees with you. People are going to hold their breath when you speak in the group, that kind of thing. And it's like you're going to suddenly not be so effective because you're not doing the how in a way that actually builds relationship. It's more destructive of it because you're running roughshod other people. You're being sarcastic with their thoughts. You're intimidating with the volume of your voice and those kinds of behaviors. So the last paragraph here is, I think of it as kind of the metaphor of gardening, that you have to have good seeds, but that's not enough. You've also got to get your hands in the dirt, which means you got to pull the weed, pull the weeds, I mean, every group is going to have, no matter how advanced or mature, is going to have moments when people, you know, fall back into competitive behaviors. And that's just the nature of the beast and the way it's a journey. You can't just overturn decades of conditioning and don't look back. So when those things happen, you try to be kind with one another while at the same time not letting it go. You try to be gently reminding and offering models of this is the direction we want to go, and have conversations about this is what we're trying to create. This is these kind of qualities, so that we have a model to go from rather than we'll let you know when we see it. So you're not stumbling around in the dark. You actually have a template you're working toward, and you're trying to reinforce it as you move that way. Now, let's see. Does that cover everything I wanted to touch on here today? I'm wondering. Okay, not quite. So I am very promotional consensus, and you'll find mixed results with groups. And a lot of it is traceable to not understanding what's been the main focus of today's hour, which is getting the foundation right, understanding that you're doing this cultural reconditioning and that cooperative culture is significantly different from competitive culture, and it requires personal work to get good results. How can we identify that, the importance of actually making that explicit? And then how can we reinforce it when people backslide or have trouble making that transition? So we've touched on some of that. There'll be more of it in the regular course, but that's the fundamental thing I wanted you to understand, and that you can get great results if you build a good foundation and understand some of the tools. I'm not going into the tools today. That's going to be in the main course. A lot of the impetus for things like consensus -1 or consensus -2, meaning we can, as long as everybody agrees but only one naysayer, we can go ahead and make an agreement. That's a tweak on it. So it's instead of full consensus where we don't proceed if somebody says no, then we allow one or two to say no, because the group groups do this because they have admitted people into their group without making the commitment to do the personal work. And they bring in this competitive energy, and it's a constant slog trying to work with this person's energy. And they said, look, I joined the group. That's what you're changing the rules now. You're putting on expectations that were not there when I joined. I'm not buying it. I'm not doing it. I didn't sign up for that. And so you're going to have to live with me. And so this is a workaround because they were sloppy at the front end about of what they let in. This is also true. I would say that that's a lot of the impetus to a thing that's very popular right now called sociocracy, which is a version of consensus. A lot of it's a high structured solution to we got problems. We can structurally keep the difficult people disempowered, which is the outcome of that. And it's I don't think that's a good solution. I would rather let's go right at the heart of the issue, which is what are we trying to create and how do we reinforce the culture that's going to allow consensus to thrive? Let's be more deliberate about who we are, and rather than let's just put people in an isolation chamber if they've been if we judge them to be deficient. Okay, so that's I'm going to teach it from that standpoint of everybody can be part of the group with standards, and we're going to make explicit what those are and how to develop them and have them be strong. All right, so I think, is that it now, Lauren? Do we have more? Yeah, okay, so let's go back. We've got a little bit of time left. We've got 5 more minutes. Do you have any questions about this? Especially, this is meant to be does Laird know what he's talking about? And it's do I think I could learn from him, over the course that's going to start in 2 weeks? So if you have any questions about that or anything relative to consensus, you got 5 more minutes to ask.
Great. Thanks, Laird. Yeah, we got a couple of questions in the chat. The first one's from Susan. How do you encourage people who are quiet to share their ideas or concerns?
Okay, that's a good question. You're going to have, in general, in community, a majority of the people are going to be introverts. That's normal. I mean, there's nothing wrong if you've got more extroverts. It's not good or bad. It's just that some people, extroverts tend to find it easier to speak, get out there, jump in. Introverts is not always, but oftentimes it's this is speaking in public or in a group can be hard, regardless of the label of introvert. It's an uphill thing to speak in front of 30 people. It's that is not easy. Other people, it's showtime. So it's meant to be a level playing field, and it's not. So there's things you can do with formats, which we'll go into in the course. For instance, rounds is one way, or small group work, or working in silence, in writing, edit. These are all things that you can do that are easier for somebody who has trouble. They may need more time to organize their thoughts, or they may need help working with 1 or 2 or a small group that's less daunting for them. They'll be less tongue-tied. There's different things you can do as a change of pace so that they have an easier on-ramp to getting their voice heard. If you do a round, you can set it up so that you don't hear from somebody twice until everybody's spoken once. So there's a protected entree. I don't want to encourage you to always do the same format because there's no perfect format. You need to have a mixture and move through them in rotation in some way so that, everybody gets something that works for them, even though everything doesn't work for you all the time. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you, Laird. Let's see. We got a question from Sue. Hey, Sue. Glad you're here. Do you see nonviolent communication helping with some of the relational skills?
Like, certainly can. I mean, I think that you have to expect, this relates to the concept of conflict, meaning somebody's in reaction to triggered by what somebody else has said or didn't say or did or didn't do. And so how do you work with that? This ties to what I'd said earlier about opening the door to emotional engagement. I think this is going to be part of the field. The most difficult and volatile portion of it is conflict, where Lauren says something, I'm angry, I'm pissed off at Lauren. Okay, so when that happens, what happens in that moment? And I think it's important the group has some understanding of what it allows to happen, what the group agrees is possible. How do you recognize or work with conflict? NVC, or nonviolent communication, is a way to do it. What I worry about with it is that, in my experience, very frequently some portion of the group is drawn to it and another portion is not. And it becomes an orthodoxy, an on-off thing, where there's like a right way, which is the NVC way, and people who are not drawn to it are left for the wayside. And I don't think that that's intentional, but that's the way it plays out a lot. So what is meant to be unifying isn't. So I can't think of a single example of a group where the whole group has bought it and that's what they do and it's worked well. And I'm not anti-NVC. I think, though, there's other things. I do a course on conflict where I'll offer an alternative view on that, because I worry about the orthodoxy part. And people remember a formula, like to say things in a certain way, and so they're following the script, and their heart's not necessarily centered around it, and it lands flat because people feel managed rather than heard. So with those caveats, I think MVC's got a lot of value. All right, we're out of time. Okay, hopefully this is entertaining and useful, and we hope to see a lot of you in a couple of weeks when the full course starts.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Laird. Thank you all for joining us and engaging in this session. We hope you found it useful. As a reminder, this is recorded, and I will be sending you all a link to the recording as well as a link to the slides here shortly. So please keep an eye on your spam folder for that. And if we don't see you in the course, we sure hope to see you all again soon. Hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.